Three. Jace, thanks so much for joining us. How are you, brother?
Beautiful, Pete. Thank you very much for having me. Excited for you.
Yeah, well, a lot of people have got a lot out of our conversation so far, and it looks like we're going to set up quite a few more in this realm of taking people through an experience or a journey. And so I'm very grateful for this time that we have together to be able to explore these things. And one of the things that seems to be, sorry, Shakopa's come and sit down with me. I'll just, there we go. One of the things, yeah, aren't they beautiful? Well, one of the things that keeps coming through lately is, again, I mean, we talked about solutions last time, but maybe solutions isn't the right answer or the right topic at the moment. It's more about perception and how to make sense of this current situation. Or is that an illusion anyway, trying to make sense of the reality in which we have manifested for ourselves? So, I mean, that's just come to me now, whether you want to address that or whether you want to take us on a different part of the journey. But I'm going to hand it over to you, my friend.
Well, I suppose the things I love about these conversations with you, they could go anywhere without any pretense. Solutions, you know, it's one of the things that seems obvious for all of us that, you know, we need to find a solution to what we're experiencing. And for me, this is at a deeper part, this constant duality or fight that we have between the physical of what we see that we are, and also then the energetic of what we don't see that we are, but we come to perceive. So for me, we live in an environment that is very much dictated by a physical reality. For many of us, we like to, you know, in our own way, explore what is beyond that. But more often than not, we've learnt through our own senses, and being more so the 5 physical senses, is we are very much caught up in, in what we feel, rather than getting to a point of what we come to understand. So what I mean about that is the physical part of our own being is deteriorates over time. It has an end point. And for many of us, because we're indoctrinated, because we're influenced, and because that's the rhythm that we become most dominated by, most of our intentions in life, as we've seen through previous generations, is about goals, is about outcomes, is about getting to a particular place. And for me, the very physical nature is, whilst we're under that spell, we continue to keep seeking the solution. On the other side of that, there's the energetic. The energetic doesn't have an end point. There is no end to it. It can't be created or destroyed. But whilst we're influenced by the physical, we continue to seek that end point. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is take something that's so significant and bring it down to one representation, one solution that's going to allow us to let go of all the things that we don't understand and we can't see within ourselves. And I would say on the opposite side of that, the energetic. For some of us, we go into that in a fleeting and an occasional way. But the energetic only has a starting point. And to me, this goes to the concept of being infinite in our own life. Until we can agree on a starting point, it's impossible to have progress. It's impossible to have what we're, some people are experiencing now, life being movement. It's impossible to have movements. We restrict ourselves and our movement in so many ways. And at this point where some of us are allowing our movement to be restricted by the things that we see outside of ourselves. Now, for me, and we've both had an experience with this in a political space and what many people believe is a solution moving forward, is in ignorance of the toxicity and chaos that has been created, we're looking to get to some place where it's all going to be okay. But for many people with great intentions, until we can agree on a starting point, it's near on impossible for that progress to be maintained. So this focus upon an endpoint, this focus upon a solution, is in denial of the problem, or denial of understanding the problem. I would suggest that when we allow ourselves to become more aligned with the energetic, everything is possible, but the difficulty that we have to overcome and we have to release and let go of is all the things that we see, everything that we know, everything that's made us comfortable, the knowledge that we've taken on from other experts in their discoveries of our own way that we live. And for me, this is highlighted through common and organized learning. I would suggest to you that if we were to take some time and space and to really understand the physical workings of our own being, we would stop interrupting it as we continue to do. We would stop wondering and needing to know what viruses do, how our body ecology works. All of these things are a magnificence that already exists, but we spend so much of our life trying to interrupt them rather than just allow them to be. And I would suggest, if science never existed, if medicine never existed, if healers never existed, as an individual, we would stop interrupting and stop perceiving that things are there to oppose me, that things are there to get me, that things are there to interrupt me, because as we intend to interrupt what's already perfect, we continue to do the same to ourselves. We continue to seek what it is or assume that there's a problem. But for me, the starting point for everything is to come from a place where everything exists to support me. But a part of that is also accepting and starting from a place of absolute ignorance. Now, when we start from ignorance, we only have a question. We're not assuming and projecting onto that particular moment as to what it is. So when we allow ourselves to come from ignorance, we can only learn from that place. And to suggest that there's some endpoint, that there's some defined level of knowledge or expertise or hierarchy of where I'm going to get to me, that's the very limitation of actually coming to a place where the solution actually presents by the environment we create, not by what we do. So there's so much, I believe, that we're trying to interrupt what's going on, and it's terrible what's happening in the world around us. But if we were present through the rest of our life or the previous generations, we would see that this is no different to any particular cycle that's been going on for some time that we continue to keep revolving around. So within all of that, I think one of the greatest challenges for all of us is to accept our authority, to accept our significance, rather than looking to compare ourselves to others at a physical level. To me, it's we don't sit here and, well, I mean, I don't, obviously, because it doesn't work for me, but I don't sit here and think about how my hair's going to grow. I don't sit here and think about my skin shedding. I don't think about my blood pumping. These are things that already are a part of a rhythm that is being organized. And it's that particular example that we can take from our own physical to be able to let that just be. And then find the courage to create beyond that, rather than going looking for problems. Because if we are experiencing a sinister experience or a sinister presence around us in some way that we want to oppose, the only reason that we oppose it is because we cannot see the other side. Now, when we're in a physical state, when we allow ourselves to be dominated by that, we are not accepting the whole of what we are. And what I would suggest is that when we allow the energetic and to be understood and the physical to be understood, and we allow it to do and be as it is and accept it as it is, we allow that integration to happen. And when we're integrated, we're in a state where beliefs don't exist. In a state of integration, we only have self-belief. Where we don't have self-belief, when we're in a disintegrated state, we have beliefs. Now, beliefs are the things that we know that tell us that this is right, this is wrong, this is my limitation, this is my exception. When we're in a state of integration, where we just allow things to be as they are, the solution's already there, but we stop opposing it. And when we're in that, let's say, that disintegrated state, the space between the energetic and the physical creates an environment for other information, for external information, which is being called the mind. And the mind is a collection of all knowledge, all information, everything that has been, that has become all of us in every particular way. And a lot of us find comfort in that because that's what they said was true. Listen to the way they speak. They're confident. They've got a degree. They have a certificate. They know what they're talking about. Now, in that place of the mind, when we're aware that we're there, we can learn from it, but it's as long as we're present to that. When we're not present to the fact that we're disintegrated because we misunderstand ourselves, we are in that place where everything is there to oppose me. And for a lot of us, it's pain that has driven us forward. It is discord, chaos, challenges, heartache that causes us to take action. And for many of us, the greatest problem in that is we dig this hole of putting ourselves in our own subjective pain. And then we climb out of that hole and we celebrate it as if we've progressed without seeing the very influence that we're having on ourselves to put ourselves in that hole. And the problem is when we do that and we get a win and we are great, everyone could observe in their own right that when they do that, 99% of the time, they then go into a state of inertia. And that state of inertia is because all they were doing is from that disintegrated state, from that pain they've created, to get back to just feeling a little bit of peace and comfort of celebrating and moving forward. But the real thing is, how do I break out of that cycle, and how do I start taking action in my life and expressing myself from a place where everything's perfect, where everything is great, and coming from that concept that everything exists to support me. But the caveat on that is I just don't understand at this point how. Rather than opposing and going, well, isn't that bad? Isn't that wrong? Well, where do we choose to leave our conversation? Who are we involving in our conversations? What space, as a further question, do we give to ourselves to converse with our own self? I mean, it's every relationship we can all look at in our own life. Our relationships are just an ongoing conversation. The enrichment of a relationship that we have with our partner or with our children is based upon the quality of the conversation that we have. Our expression and our ability to go into those darkened places, and not so much, I'm not talking bad places, I'm talking places that we've held ourselves back from stepping into. And to me, this goes to the core of it, is when I mean that in working with people, that the thing that I've seen that is most evident, whether they are at the top of their game in the world or whether they're just working out how to manage their own household, it's their significance and the value of what they have to share that is most difficult to move beyond. I see people at a top level that getting into, the peak of their performance in the world, that once they get there, they don't know what to do. They're defined by something outside of them. Once I've got to number one, where do I go from here? What am I? What have I been moving towards? So, in a lot of all of this, it's, I would say the things that restrict us most in all of this is what we hold onto. And our inability to be able to let go of the things that are valuable or were once valuable in our life is what restricts us. And it's not by mistake that the word mind, which many of us get caught up in, is just an extension of the word to hold on, an inability to let go. To be able to receive is all about the letting go. Many of us are trying to receive, trying to acquire, and trying to take things on, whilst we're continuing to hold on to what we previously possessed or has been possessing us. So this particular practice, what I would say, of releasing and letting go. Now, when I say releasing, I don't mean dismissing from our life. I mean allowing ourselves to change that conversation, allowing ourselves to change that relationship, because as we grow and change in every moment, the people around us do as well. But if we continue to keep seeing them as they were, well, when in that relationship, we go back to where we were at that point, and we feel frustrated by that person's lack of growth because we still see them as they are, not realizing we're the one that's perceiving them, not them. And that's, I think, our greatest inadequacy is demonstrated in one of our biggest confusions, is that we want to be compassionate to people, that we want to fix things for others, whether that's as a parent to our children. And when we see them, you know, I think every parent goes through it at some time, that their child comes home and they're being bullied. And there's that, sometimes that fire that comes up and goes, oh, I'm going to go get that kid. You know, how dare you touch my child? And, you know, that's obviously a futile circus that can be created. But to be able to step back and recognize, if I am stepping in to help someone else, especially if they have not requested it from me, not being clear and clarified on what it is that they're wanting, requiring in their own life, my intention to step in and help someone is based upon the belief that they're inadequate, that they can't do that for themselves, and that their way of doing it will be wrong. And I've got to share what I know to make sure that you do it right, so that you don't go through pain. But ultimately, our level of our inadequacy is demonstrated by how much we believe we need to help other people out, because we don't believe that they have the capacity to do that for themselves. That's maybe a starting point. And that to me, I would say, in every part of life, is presence to the starting point. Where am I beginning from?
Well, let's just take this. I mean, that's a lot to digest and to understand. And I'm going to have to listen to that over probably a few times. But let's just put this into context, if you don't mind, because I have probably the belief that the people that listen to these conversations that we share through this technological gift called the internet, and who is watching this, may have friends and family that are choosing to go along with what we might call the mainstream narrative, or the spell that comes out of the televisions, the mainstream news, for instance, or the radio, talkback radio. And I've had the good fortune to spend time with my mum over the last 48 years, just turned 48. And Nick and I were talking about this yesterday, because I remember we were listening, sorry to be really trivial here, but our little dog Shakoba this morning was walking across the floor, and I said, I wonder if you never knew what that noise was, what you think it came from, because it's such a strange noise. Her little paw was going across the vinyl floor. And I said to Nick, I said, I remember as a kid, I used to call into the secret sound on the radio programs, where they have this weird little noise and you call in. She goes, did you ever get through? I said, no, I don't think I ever did. But what it reminded me of was, I was brought up in a household with my mum. It was just the two of us pretty much. And she listened to the radio, commercial television. And recently I've been, over the last year and a half since the pandemic, I've been spending time with my mum. I live with her when I travel to Sydney. And she still listens to a version of mainstream news, Sky News. But one thing she still listens to is commercial radio in the daytime. And for me, it's such a foreign thing, because I haven't listened to commercial radio since I left home 31 years ago. But when I'm in that environment where I can hear it, it fucking triggers me. It triggers me for so many reasons, where I have to turn it off. I said, Mum, do you mind if we turn this down or turn it off, because it's invading my mind. And sorry, I'm taking this out for a long version. And But it's interesting because she doesn't really believe in what she's hearing from the radio anyway, but she continues to listen to it. And I just want to put this into context, everything that you've just said for the listeners and the viewers, that will have friends, family, even themselves that may even doubt the messages coming through or believing in the messages coming through. And I'll just talk about the last year and a half. We'll use the pandemic as an example because it's so overwhelming for a lot of people at the moment. How do you, I mean, you talked about that it's perfect and it's serving us. Sorry if I've butchered your words, but how do people come into a place where even if it's their children, and I'll just clarify this because many people that have been outspoken over the last year and a half and previously against the medical establishment, like we're talking the truth warriors, what they would label themselves, big name people. They've confided in me and others that even their children have chosen to take the vaccine, 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds. And these people are been on the front lines for the last 20, 30 years, sort of dedicating their whole career to educating the masses about how dangerous some pharmaceuticals can be or some vaccines can be. Yet their own children have chosen to take that experiment. And I'm sure this applies to a lot of people that are listening and viewing this. So how do people accept that it's completely perfect for not only them, but also for the person that's gone and taken an experiment, for instance?
That's such a, such an important point. First of all, well, welcome to 48. It's just about to exit it, but it's a great place always. But like what you're saying about the radio, I think I had the experience years ago, like my it's about 8 or 9 years ago, my mum came to stay with me and they wanted to put the news on. And at that time, we didn't have a TV aerial, or I had a cord for a TV aerial, and it was for something that I enjoyed as a kid was the AFL. So I'd watch, it got plugged in once a week to watch my team, and that would be about my zoning out. And but when I hear like commercial radio, if I hop into a car and commercial radio's on, or I hear the news, it's exactly the same as what you're talking about that's happening, what I perceive in this perfection with these children of these truth warriors that are going out and having the experiment. When we become dominated by one thing, like, so for me, I was, as a kid, the news was on and it was, it's just a part of life. And you get at ease with it. But then you get to a point, once you're at ease with something in your life, you're allowed to then ask questions and go beyond it. So you accept the let's say the presence of it in your own life. You might not have to agree with it, but accepting it for what it is. Because we can, with the news, go into a scenario where it's corrupt, it's terrible, it's this. Now, these judgments, and the only issue with any judgment is that we hold on to it. I mean, there's these great concepts of, orators around the world that, you should never judge anyone. Judgment is sin. And these types of separations of the truth are missing the simplicity that everything that we restrict the movement and the expression of is what becomes toxic. So when we are opposing the news and its expression, it becomes toxic to us. But we can move beyond that by accepting that there is a role that the news plays. And for certain people, they may be going through their own support, and for them and their own choices is that they don't want to live in a particular way that we might perceive to be right. So eventually, for me, I've been so filled with that particular frequency of what the news and commercial radio and everything else puts out in its own way, that I've had enough of it. I don't deny it. I don't push away. It's just not something that is there. I've come to understand it in my own way. Now, on the other side with these truth warriors and their kids going and doing it, when anyone gets told, whenever anyone gets influenced by a particular way of living, an indoctrination of this is what we are, son, you're going to become a lawyer like me and like your grandfather and your grandfather before, this is what life is about. This is how it will be for you. Now, I'm not saying that every single person that has an ideal of the way that life should be from this point of truth, that their children are all going to get vaccinated. But whenever we deny an expression within our own self, we'll have an uprising. And for me, this was, humbled to me recently. I had my son in a Montessori type school because it fit with my ideals and what we wanted to create. Until I realized that the very badge that I was attempting to wear. And it became very obvious to me in my own awareness, but it took a while to accept it because I wanted to fight against it. I want to go in the mainstream. But it became very clear that my son was to go to a local mainstream school. And he started, it was difficult for us to take on because, no, this is the way we live. One thing I've learned that in him going into the mainstream has created a significant balance because the way in which we live, the way we communicate, the way we operate in a home space allows him to go into a place of opposition and have a contrast without being fearful of it, without ignoring and avoiding it. And it's very much like the physical and the energetic, is all the things that we don't understand, we continue to avoid. Because when we have understanding in our life, that's what creates action. So a knowing, let's just say where we get knowledge and the movement of knowledge through us promotes conversations. And I would suggest that most of what we speak of in our own life are the things that we don't understand. So when we get to a point where we understand something, we then have the how to, and then we can move forward. And the greatest challenge in our own life is then to be able to be free to do that our way, without being concerned of how it's going to impact or affect anyone else. Now, when someone is so dogged and determined on what is right, that opposite expression has to be created. And that becomes a part of bringing everything back into a place of integration, of where all of those things exist as they're accepted. So I would suggest the more that someone continues to keep pushing and fighting, and like you say, there's a lot of truth warriors out there, but the thing is, when they don't understand what they're opposing, when they can't embrace it and see the beauty in that, they may not agree with it, but when they can't see the beauty and the base level organization and the effort and the planning and the strategy and everything that's gone into doing that, when they don't understand that, they'll continue to keep fighting against it. And all they'll do is continue to keep perpetuating. To be able to say that I am focused on finding the truth is in denial of my disconnection and my deceits and my own sinister nature that I don't want to accept or look at. And that's part of the challenge. We were taking a group through an advanced teaching just the other day. And it's an interesting thing in these spiritual spaces where people want to get to this higher level of ascension, this spiritual enlightenment, a connection to a higher self, a dharma, or wherever they want to identify that particular place as. And they sit in the love and the light, and they're grateful and continue to keep affirming to themselves what they are. But if we continue to have to keep affirming what we are we really that? Are we able to, if we were truly in our own presence, if we were truly accepting of all of what we are, maybe what we would find the greatest opportunity of our exploration is to learn all the things that we deny and that we oppose, and to start to look at life by a predetermined disconnected space, by not avoiding the ego, going into the ego by choice and exploring what's there, so that we're not in fear of it. Because the fear is only just not knowing what's there. And whilst we continue to keep perpetuating what is right, what is wrong continues to keep growing and becomes a monolith in our own life that we continue to keep running from. But to be able to, in our own self, see, this is one thing that used to hit for me a lot as a kid, is that when we are, most of us, there's the let's say the equal of opposites, and we see the opposites in life when we're I would say when we're disintegrated within our own self. So for example, challenge and support might be two opposites in our own life, and I think we can all see it. The things that inspire us and around us are the people that take on the challenges. You know, that they realize the gravity of what they're about to move into and how difficult and challenging it may be. But we become inspired because they're going into a place with courage and bravery that, you're sure you're going to be able to make, well, what happens if this goes? What happens if you lose that? But there's such a certainty of these people as they're moving forward. But when we start to take on the challenge in our own life, when we start to embrace the whole, ultimately what has to grow is support. And when we go into life expecting and opening and embracing the greatest challenges that exist in front of us, we start to have this experience where life starts to move in a way that seems to be aligned, seems to be all these coincidences lining up for us. But on the opposite side of that, when we keep going for looking for support, wanting other people to do, wanting it all to be controlled, wanting to know exactly how it's going to work out before we step forward, we're going to find consistent challenges and find ourselves going, why is this continuing to happen? Why do I keep experiencing this? Because in our own life, I don't know many people that have decided to, especially as they're growing, decide to, I'm going to leave the career that I have because I want to be less challenged, less stimulated, less engaged. It doesn't mean they work harder, but they want to be able to find something that brings up their own truth and allow them to discover what they are. But ultimately, when we keep focusing so heavily and holding on to one ideal in denial of the other has to be expressed. And quite often, those particular individuals that are experiencing that, and that there's a lot of pain at the moment with people seeing their families separate based upon different ideals. I've had friends calling from overseas, and long-term relationships have just ended because of a difference of idea and opinion. And, that also comes back to what we're talking about earlier, is what's the end point that we're actually moving towards? What, with this marriage that we have, with this relationship we have, am I free in this relationship? Do I have freedom in this relationship? Because if I'm not free to leave it at any particular time, am I actually free to stay in it? And for many of us, that's a really challenging place to be, because we have these relationships and we need them, we have to, they're family, they're my partner, they're my kids. But in the way in which we want to express ourselves so openly and freely, how can we do so when we intend to restrict the movement of others without actually asking and doing simple things like asking our children a question, asking our partner a question, asking our supposed opponent a question, rather than dictating to them that this is the way that it is, and denying that expression. So the more that we restrict our expression and the expression of others, they don't get an opportunity to explore that themselves. If your family and parents or whatever it may be are watching the news, encourage them to. Encourage them to be what they are, because it's in their own discovery that you've gone through as well. That you discovered what you found to be true. And when we can start to appreciate, look, I find it, the word I was going to say is ironic, but it's not ironic because it's perfect. But there's a concept in a conscious circle that might say, well, we only need 1% of people to change in order to change the world. Oh, really? Is that the case? Now, if we actually look around, that's exactly what's already happening. But the only thing that the 1% that might be controlling and pulling levers and all the rest of it, is because they have one thing, which is the same that exists in our own body, that is evidenced in front of us each and every single day, is there is a supreme level of organization, not an occasional one, but a supreme level of organization. Now, that's what I feel that all of us are missing in our own life, is that level of organization. And we can organize our house once it's messy. We can organize things when they become disorganized. But to actually start to organize what we want to create in our life and start to bring everything towards that, we have to have a starting point of accepting where we're beginning from, and all of the tragedy, all of the trauma, all of the crisis that we have. We need to bring attention to that. We need to accept, so that is equally as the beauty and brilliance in our own life. I mean, for those that might be using things like affirmations, and I'm an infinite being, and life and love comes to me in every particular moment. Try saying the opposite. Try accepting the opposite, because it is also true. But whilst we continue to focus on one thing, we continue to keep experiencing and opposing the other. So what I'm suggesting is, for me, a starting point is something called ease. And ease is not about, hanging loose. Ease is about the acceptance of everything as it is. I might not like it, I might not agree with it. But as I accept everything as all is, so if I was to look into, I was deceitful here, I was rude there, I had thoughts that were, I would never want to repeat again in my life. I also have beauty, I also have generosity, I also have all of these other things. But when I can accept all of what I am, there's an amazing thing that happens when I come to that particular point of at ease with it, without trying to change it, but just first coming to ease with it. From that place of ease where I come into acceptance, when I choose to move forward, I'm having an impact on everything that I am taking responsibility and am present to. So let's just say we had 10 units of energy. If I was to be aware of only 1% of what I am, just the love, the light, the beauty, and everything that is there that I want to accept, when I allow myself to move forward and make a decision from that point, I'll use the same amount of energy but have a 1% impact on my life. But when I can develop and tap into my true awareness from an integrated state, and I can accept all of what it is because it cannot harm me, then what I start to do with that same amount of energy is I have a greater impact. And this is a part of the confusion that many people, like, they continue to keep working hard, grinding, hustling and pushing and pushing and pushing, when they might see their neighbor who seems to just cruise along with life and things just keep falling into their place because they take on the responsibility, because they become aware and present to all of what they are. Now, whilst we continue to be focused on smaller parts of ourselves, by default, other people with a greater vision, with a greater impact, with a higher level of organization start to influence us. And they take up that other percentage of us that we're not seeing, that we're not being, that we continue to keep fighting against. Stop doing that. Get out of my life. I don't want your overreach in my life. But it's only there because we're not present to it. It's like being the entire world, and the entire world as it exists today, but only believing that we are, the city of Melbourne, and then wondering why there's pillaging and raping and discord going on in all of these out. Why am I feeling all of this? Because I'm only present to this little bit, which in front of me seems great. Maybe not if you're in Melbourne at times at the moment, but if you were just Melbourne, and all of these other lands outside of you that are a part of you are in complete discord, that's going to impact you. But if we don't become present to all of that, if we don't bring our attention to it, we can't just wish to be what we're not. And that's a part of coming into that, place of significance, to start to be patient, to give ourselves space, to just tiptoe into, well, what is it that exists in my life? And this is I suppose, something to share with people that they can apply. Because a lot of what we're saying, as you said, there might be a bit to absorb, but to me, it's all in the experience. I mean, I don't want people to take my word for it. I mean, the whole nature of independence is to have your own experience and understanding. So I would suggest to people at any particular time, when they're confused, when they're overcome, when they're overwhelmed, is to get a pen and paper and write out specifically the experience they're having in their life. And I mean the depths of it. If they're in a dark relationship, if they're in a strained financial position, to write in with absolute specifics of what caused it, how it's existing, and how it's making you feel. Don't do anything with it. This is the problem with fixing, because we're assuming it's a problem. It's just a starting point. Now, I'd suggest to people to practice this for a period of 7 days, just with a pen, with their own thoughts, and write down exactly what it is that's going in their life. Equally see the beauty as they do the discord, but write it down and resist trying to do anything with it. Simply become present to it. What you can and will experience if you allow this to happen is the recognition that there's nothing in this world is more powerful than the attention we have. And to understand what our attention is. If you have a pain in your body, if you have a sickness in your body, when you bring attention to it in order to understand it, you enliven it, you allow it and liberate it to be free. In the same way that if you sit in front of another person and you sit there with the intention only to understand them, they will come to life. They will blossom, they will grow. They will get back to their own capacity to start to explore their authentic expression where they feel free. So when we can create that space for our own self, when we can go into and understand the very thing that we're most challenged by, when we can come to be aware of it, not as someone else has told us, well, this is what's going on, just your own awareness on it. Try that, write it down, put it to the side, and continue to keep moving on with life. But get it out of you. And it's not about anything else except for bringing attention to it. That's I really you know, I think as we were saying before, that when we're in that separated state, it's kind of like, to me, when we're disintegrated from like the physical and the energetic, rather than being in a state of harmony and integration, is certain experiences exist in one paradigm or environment, and others exist in another paradigm environment. Like what's said maybe commonly, that cancer can't exist in an alkaline environment. So the space that we create and the environment we create for ourselves, it's as simple as, and sometimes too simple, that, you know what, sometimes we're going to fall over. If I'm going to fall over, and that's going to happen no matter what I do in my life, I only need to know one thing: how to get back up. So and that's what I look at here, if I understand how to get integrated, suddenly all the things that I want to fix in my life, suddenly all the problems, suddenly the limitations, the things I don't have or that I don't want, they suddenly are no longer there. The thoughts, the acquisition, the possessing, and the needing of those go away. When we know how to get back up, ironically, what we start doing, because we know the worst thing that's going to happen is I'm going to fall over in some way, in some part of our own experience. If I know I'm going to fall over, but I can always get back up, suddenly my steps, without even forcing or trying, just become bigger. And I start to liberate more of my life with the same amount of energy that I was putting in previously. And that's where we start to compound and realize our own power by the own evidence that we have, rather than what we're being told. So I'm not sure if that answered the question, but it's more that for the, you know, I've had those same experiences with people that are very much nurtured their children into thinking a particular way, but are finding and wanting to do the complete opposite.
Yeah, it's interesting when you brought up your boy and the school system, because friends of ours that wanted their children to go to an alternative school, as they're known, whether it be a Steiner school, Montessori school, or homeschool, for instance, because they didn't believe in the educational system. They've had to do a whole 180 And because it wasn't working for the child, it wasn't working for them, it wasn't working for their dynamic. And, shock horror, they've had to go, this child and our relationship and for the flow of everything, they actually need to go into the system. And I love that concept that, the to let go and to surrender of those beliefs that we hold so dear, that, it's be ready for the unexpected type thing. And I will finish by saying, I'm being called to have another medicine journey, which has, for the last year and a half, it hasn't called me. And it's starting to, well, it's calling me over the last few weeks. It's like, okay, this is interesting. And I always check in to see what that is. Is it ego? Is it intuition? Is it just the path? What is this? Is it fear? Is it, but one of the things that I've loved about some of the medicine journeys that I've been on, especially with the toad, for instance, is that you get to experience non-judgment. And I know that's very simplifying the experience, but in that experience, there is no right or wrong. There is no good or bad. There's no black or white. There's just everything, and you are everything, and you don't even exist. But there's just, it's all perfect, even the imperfectness of the perfection, if that makes sense. It's the duality, or maybe not the duality, it's the paradox that everything's perfect, even if it doesn't seem like it's perfect. And even in the imperfection, it's perfect. And so I'd love for, maybe we finish off on that, where you can delve a little deeper into that knowing. And again, we'll take that last year and a half, for instance, is this has to happen. All of this has to happen. There's no other way for this not to happen like this. This is for I've come to the realization now, and it's taken me a long time, but this is perfect. The lockdowns are perfect. The struggle, the challenges, the enforcement, the captivity. I'm just using the words that I don't necessarily believe in myself, because we were having a conversation before this. Like, I choose not to be captive or contained, and I choose freedom in all aspects of my life as often as I can, wherever I can, and wherever I see those blockages, then I know I've got more exploring to do. But if you want to finish up by giving us your experience and understanding again of that non-judgment.
Yeah.
But you can have a preference out of that.
I just, I suppose one of the, when I started questioning the way life was, or what I was being presented as an offer anyway of what life was, it became really obvious to me that things were about identifying a pain or a problem in someone or something, and then trying to find a solution. And it just, to me, at a young age, it just seemed like this crazy merry-go-round. Like, yeah, that's all good, that's great, yeah, we've all got that, we experience that, but what do we do past that? How do we explore the unknown? How do we navigate what we can't see? Because there's obviously more to us than this. So to me, like I was saying before, the only thing that becomes toxic in our life are the things that we restrict and hold on to. So non-judgment is about being at peace with judging. We have to judge when we cross the road. If we don't judge in that particular way, if we don't judge the nature of a person that's coming into our space, it's when we hold on to that and go, geez, that the way they looked at me that first time, I'm never going to get that. No, stay away. That's, we've all had those experiences. We've been told first impressions last. Now, they are last. because they're the first thing that happened. They're not lasting because they belong in our life. They're last because they're the furthest part away from this current relationship we're having. So in each moment as we're present, we're having our first moment. But there's the safety in holding on to those judgments in our own physical life, because we're going to die, you know, and the fear that comes with that. This is all coming to an end. There's a timeline I have to work to here. So judgment to me is a beautiful thing. It's a great thing. But like everything in life, we only hold on to things because we believe in our own inadequacy to explore, to have an adventure. I don't know if I was unique in this as a kid, but one of the things when I sort of worked out about the explorers of the world and traveling and all the rest, I was so disappointed that the world had all been discovered, because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go out and explore. But then I realized beyond that, there's, you know, it's but a small percentage of what really exists. So to me, it's coming to an observation and studying things that already are perfect. I mean, a tree, nature. Someone once said to me that the first law of the universe is non-interruption. And for me, that's to recognize the perfection of what is already there that doesn't require my attention to sustain itself, to grow, to advance. And then it's for me to find the challenge in, well, what is it that I'm here to become? Now, I would say within everything, Pete, where judgment comes from is the ignorance that every single thing in our life starts with chaos. Everything, and when I mean by chaos, I don't mean, you know, like Maxwell Smart or something that's opposing or anything along those lines. Maybe show my age there. But the thing is, with chaos, it is just, I haven't had an opportunity to organize that yet in a way that serves me. So the way that thing exists, it's not meant to be the same way that everyone else is doing it, but how would I want that in my life? So if I can first recognize, yes, everything is chaotic. As soon as I put attention on it, and as soon as I start to see it, it's like, you know, you paint a wall in a house, and you go, I just want to paint the spot, it's not looking good. You suddenly then realize how the rest of the walls really need a bit of a touch up as well. So when we start to bring attention to something, we are inevitably going to find chaos. But if we resist that because we don't understand the very nature of our own existence, we'll continue to keep fighting against the starting point. And because we can't get to that starting point and accepting the chaos, all we want to do is get to the end point. What's the solution here? Let's just get past, just tell me how to get there. I just want to know, give me the pill, give me the device I can put on me and I can feel the frequencies. Give me the things that are outside of me that, you know, I don't want to deal with this chaos. But when we embrace chaos, that's liberation. But for many of us, we've seen those examples in so many upstanding and courageous individuals in life, is they're prepared to do what's different. And for many of us, when we're in this place of safety, we're trying to do what's the same as others. But for me, accepting chaos as a starting point in every part of life, to have the humility in just saying, I don't know. Look, and not from a point that I'll never know, but at this particular point, I don't know. And start to practice that in life. Start to, I mean, you don't have to deny what you're aware of and present to, but it's also in the ability to let go of what you know, that you discover a greater understanding, that you discover more beyond that. Because we're not holding onto it. So for me, chaos is just seeking organization. It's just seeking its highest expression. The first part of energy in its own existence is it seeks its highest expression. And that's why when you see certain people walking down the street, they're enthusiastic and they can't help themselves but just be who they are, and they become very, you know, engaging and influencing, and what do you call it? Not seductive, but they're just, there's a magnetism towards them. And those particular people are taking the unused energy of others and channeling into a higher expression. Energy is not about here to be your friend. Energy doesn't care, or if you want to call it your soul, doesn't care whether you get it in this lifetime, because it doesn't have a timeline. It's not sitting there in the background barracking for you and saying, hey, you've got to get this, you've got to get, it's an opportunity, it's an offer. if you want to stop and create a space in my own life on actually starting to have a conversation, which might be, you know, for many of us being, stop daydreaming, come back to reality, you know, stop talking to yourself. This guy's going crazy, he's talking to himself. All of these types of concepts. And I mean, consider just as a man in that type of, and even a woman, but it's more so a male thing, that if you started sitting with a certain group of people and started talking about what you're imagining in your imagination and talking about your imagination as the truth. Because I'd ask people, what is your imagination if it's not the truth? What if you actually trusted in your imagination as the truth? Because for most of us, we do, but we do so by using that particular nobility that we have in imagination to look into what we know from the past. And I remember that time that fell over, that broke, and then our imagination gets focused on what we know, not what we do not. And it's these type of concepts that when we can allow ourselves to imagine, that we give ourselves just that little bit longer, that extra moment to go beyond the assumption that we've created, to actually just, you know, hold on and embrace to another just for that little bit longer, rather than, oh, look, you know, I've got to go and do this. I've got to put the things out. I've got to do whatever, rather than in that particular moment, just being present to that. And that's one of the things that I would suggest, as you know, as what we've gone through just today, is for people to maybe take away, just to do a budget on your own life and the way in which time operates in your world. How much time do I give to myself? Not from a point of, excuse me, a deliberate practice that I've learned, but to sit in my own humility and to recognize I don't even know what to do with myself. To not try to get to a connected space, to not try to get to an enlightened space, just to sit in the presence of what you are and actually bring attention to yourself to begin a conversation, to actually start to see what that feels like and feel the resistance come up. Well, this is crazy. I don't want to be, I've got things to do. There's important things I've got to get done. But to sit in that very importance, because one truth will never fail, is that your life is directly dictated by the relationship that you have with yourself. And if we just knew that shortcut, that we just started having a conversation in our own delusion, as we might have to liberate with our own self, well, we have a feeling, rather than going, no, that won't work. Why don't you ask yourself, well, how could that possibly work? And why not have the patience to not need that answer to come in that moment so that you can feel comfortable and safe, but allow yourself to create an environment in your life. And what I'm suggesting here is, if you have a predetermined decision that you have made, that I'm going to give myself an amount of time each day, every day, to deepen and to explore myself, is that when those random thoughts come up through the day that start interrupting, or we feel might be a download or whatever it may be, they come and interrupt our life because we don't have a place for them to be expressed. So, in like what we're talking about before, if we don't give space for it, it's going to start creating it, and it's going to disorganize you and come at moments when you're doing something else, and you know, you're driving your car and suddenly start getting all this information. You can't stop from driving the car to receive that. But if you create a space each day, not to find some spiritual practice, but just to explore an adventure within your own self, much like what you do on a plant medicine journey, is we start to realize how far more significant we are, but we need to develop that relationship. There's definite practices that we share, but I'm saying we've already got everything we need. But to just sit in possibly the discomfort, the resistance, maybe for the first 2 weeks, now I'm going to do that, but observing yourself not doing and accepting that. Well, you know what? I haven't done it yet, but I'm not going to sit and judge myself. I'm going to be aware of, wow, there's a lot of resistance here for me just to spend time with myself. Accept that, embrace that. But to sit with ourselves each day for no purpose whatsoever, but just to allow thoughts to come and not just be the subject of them, but to ask questions of them with the intention of understanding them. And I'd say, just as a last point, with anyone that you're finding difficulty with in your life, with anyone that's not seeing your way, Sit with them without giving any answers, but just have questions. Make a commitment to sit with that person to continue. And there'll be a time where you go, oh, no, that's just crazy. No, that won't. No answers. Sit there only asking questions until such a point where you start to see the truth of that person's expression and you start to liberate your own beliefs, limitations on what you think is right. Ask the questions in order to understand, because that by habit will start to do the same thing with yourself.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you. That's yeah, that's lovely. That's I really hope people get some benefit out of that. It's probably one of my biggest frustrations of realizing how simple things are, but how complicated we make it. But at times, just to give ourselves and to be able to laugh. I mean, to me, that's one of the most important things for me. Is there's a real depth to what we could go into, but the ability to be able to laugh at the irony of what we do to oppose ourselves and why we're having certain experiences when we give attention to it. Our life is an absolute comedy. You know, like we start to, well, those things have happened and that thing occurred. We can start to actually laugh at it and then we let it go. It's like, oh, of course that's been happening because I've been doing this. I never even noticed that. But yeah, nothing will survive that opposes you in the pleasance of your own attention.
Can you say that last bit once more? Nothing will survive.
Nothing will survive. I don't know, it just came through. Nothing will survive in the pleasance of our own attention, I think is what it was. And the pleasance part, I would say, is a critical part, because we're not going in there on a mission to find a problem. We're going in there to understand and to recognize the grace of everything else that's there, because it is there. It's there in everyone. But if we don't want to understand it, we'll know and we'll tell them what's wrong and what they need to be in order to make me feel happy. So thanks. Yeah, that's that.
Thanks, Chase. Love you, brother.
Love you too, mate, and thank you so much.
I'll be listening to this one a few times.
I really appreciate everything you do, Pete. I mean, it's without words.
Well, it's interesting. I thank you. I appreciate that, and it's been an interesting year or so, because I actually don't feel like I'm doing much anymore. You know, I was on a mission, and now the mission seems to have changed. One thing I do love is doing this, what we're doing right now. It's one of my favorite adventures, is this conversation that I get to have, and this is the fourth one this week, and they're just beautiful. It's just beautiful. Yeah, a woman I interviewed yesterday is a Shamani, I think her name is. A wonderful Indian doctor, lives in the United States. She's had the injection twice, the experiment twice, and she explained how she viewed it as, I will take the medicine that my body needs and I will excrete or get rid of anything that my body doesn't need. You know, and then a different person the day before talking about Vedic meditation, and somebody else talking about finances, and tomorrow I've got someone talking about habits, and what I love about this is just a sharing of, as you said, informational beliefs, or I don't have to agree with everything that everybody says, but I respect that that's their belief. And I'm so grateful, I've learned more in the last couple of years by doing these podcasts than I ever have in my life, so to speak. Maybe I can't simplify it that much, but for me, I feel like I'm in school.
Yeah, it'd be amazing.
And I feel like the student, and I get to share this. So if that's what I'm called to do at the moment, I feel like it is, that's enough. You know,
Yeah.
it's perfect at this point in time, and there may come a point in time where I choose not to do this anymore because it may not be the path. But at the moment, I freaking love it. I love it.
Yeah. Well, you're still bringing all the ingredients together to nourish people.
Well, it definitely opens a dialogue. What I find beautiful about this is I have no idea where it's going to go.
Mm.
That's what's fascinating for me. I don't know whether it's what I'm getting out of it. I don't know whether, I've had done interviews where I'm like, fuck, do I really want to share that? It didn't really do anything for me.
Mm.
But maybe it'll do something for somebody else.
Mm.
So it's this, and I'm not even really even curious about it anymore. Before I used to be curious, like, what'll be the ripple effect of something like this?
Mm.
Whereas now it's like, I actually have no expectation anymore, whether I'm the only person that gets to listen and experience this, or whether 1,000 people, or who knows? It's irrelevant anymore.
Yeah, isn't that? I think that's a really, really big thing. That that whole idea of selfishness. That you're being selfish by putting yourself first and indulging yourself. But when I think, from my experience in speaking to you, is when I've spoken to others, that there always needs to be, what we're going to discuss, and there needs to be an outcome, and how many people we're going to get. It's like, yeah, well, I'm not. It's not really why I want to do this. I'm not. I'm not doing it because of what it's going to do. I'm doing it because I believe there's something to share, and I think that's what's so beautiful about what you do, is because it's native to you. It's not natural and forced. It's native. It's just by you being yourself. You engage so many others because it welcomes people into, let alone speaking into this space, but to listen to it as well.
I've noticed over the last few years, certain people that I would love to have a chat with.
Yeah.
That the predetermining factor for them is, what's the demographic, how many people, and as soon as that information comes, that's their sort of default. I'm like, okay, this isn't going to happen. Not this isn't going to happen now, because usually when I invite people, or people want to be, I had this beautiful email this morning from a cardiologist from America wanting to be on the program. He goes, I'd love to share my new book that teaches people how to not be on my table, my operating table. Stoked to have a chat with you, stoked. Because that person just from my understanding, he's got a book coming out, but it doesn't even matter. It's just like, here's some information that may help people not end up on the surgical table. Isn't that beautiful? What a great concept.
Yeah, absolutely. Learning all that, like learning to fight so you never have to. But that's I mean, that's isn't that great that it's
it flows.
I love that idea. I love that.
Yeah, it's flowing at the moment, and it's sometimes it doesn't flow, and I have to accept that, and other times it does flow. And I mean, it's always flowing. It's just, sometimes it's a trickle, and sometimes it's a steady stream.
Yeah, absolutely. But I reckon you learn more from how gracefully you walk through the the ones where it might not be perceivably flowing. It's just different to what I've recognized to support me. Do you know, if you know what I mean? Like, I always find the greatest learning in being able to, and I had this earlier in the week where I just felt completely overwhelmed, and I was sitting there and to record a video, a live video, and it was I sat there for an hour and a half, 2 hours, just crippled with not being able to do it. And instead of trying to slap myself around the face and let's get into this, I love just the place of just sitting back and going, well, bring all of it to me. I want to experience all of this, and allowed it to pass through me. And I learned so much from that particular place. And that's to me what's so important. So I've had a lot of people coming up recently telling me that, you know, and it's happened for the last 15, 20 years, that people always tell me I need to be more vulnerable. You need to expose more of yourself. You need to show more of your softness and what you are. And for me, that's always been a really interesting concept of what people want from me, or what I need to show and what I need to become. And I think when it's what I've found with what I do, the most vulnerable I am is when I'm having these conversations, as when I'm putting information forward in a way that, well, who am I to speak of that? Who am I to share that? If you want to come and have a look in my cupboards, you'll start to see I'm not this perfect human that is being projected to you because I'm sharing something that you might not have considered, that you might somehow consider wise. It's not wise. That's my vulnerability. And it's it's a lot of like the irony of equality. We very rarely go, if there's a downtrodden sector of the community, equality is never about going to, well, here's this aspiring, succeeding aspect of life. Why isn't equality up to that particular point? Why is it about equality bringing it back down to where the most downtrodden perceivedly is? And that's it's an interesting way that we sort of just go, well, but we should help them out. But if we want to help them out, let them show the example of what it is we perceive that they're missing out on. Why do we have to keep pulling everyone back?
That brings me back to commercial radio, and I'll just finish off with this funny aspect of it, because part of my job years ago was having to be contractually available to do commercial radio segments where they interview me about the job that I was doing for the TV network. And it was so bizarre being in that environment with these people. And a few times I think I've said, I thought, how about we just have an intelligent conversation? Yeah. And what I came to realize was those drive time radio shows or breakfast TV shows or all of that. It was to dumb everything down to the point of not even humor, but just idiocy, if that's the right word, or just quite base humor of,
yeah.
and and often I thought, well, I go in there with the intention of, now let's try to put a spoke in these wheels, and let's raise the vibration or the frequency for the host, just to see whether we could or not, or whether I could.
Yeah.
But it was fascinating. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes we could have a really good conversation, and other times it didn't go that way. And I don't know why I'm talking like this at the moment. I'm bringing that up, but I guess what you're saying is that's where to raise the frequency and vibration, it doesn't seem to be that difficult to do, but there seems to be a lot of resistance around that from some.
Absolutely. Just for going back to that school thing with my son, one of the things that really, after I got past the uniforms and got past that walking in twos and lines and all of this sort of, ironically, organization in its own way, but the was one thing the teacher said is that it's cool here to excel. Because we asked him about bullying, I said, what's the culture like for bullying? He goes, well, you know what? We don't focus on bullying. We focus upon excelling. And that it's actually cool to do that it's cool to be brilliant at something. It's cool to be great at something. So what we found is that most with bullying happens because, there's someone that is different or someone that is better that triggers someone else, and they want to, pummel them down to their own level. And it's a rhythm and a frequency that goes through that particular school or environment. And it was like what you're saying. I remember when I was a kid that I'd tell stories of myself of being clumsy or tripping up or doing something stupid and I used to look at that and think, well, why did I do that? It was just the that was the environment that you're speaking into. Because if you started speaking of depth or of something significant, or like even just an entrepreneurial idea of let's go and do this, the naysaying and the resistance to that was so significant. You know, it's like, don't be so deep, don't be so serious. Well, I'm not, I'm just exploring, you know. So it's interesting how we do that, because I used to do that a lot, and still do at times as well, just, but it's
yeah, I'll never forget the time. It was 3 years ago, I think it was. And I might have told you this story. I might have actually on a podcast with you or somebody else, that one of the questions I was asked was, who inspires you the most? And I just wrote me. And it was a mainstream newspaper in Australia. Oh, I'm not going to lie. There's no lie. This is the truth. This is my truth. I inspire, you know, as an individual, who inspires you the most? And it was like, me. Fuck. No one's had to live the life that I've had to get to where my experiences. It's me that gets me out of bed every day. You know, I don't think about somebody else that gets me out of bed. It's nobody else that inspires me to have a thought that I can potentially turn into a reality, or a concept or an idea which I can manifest. You know, there is nobody else. I don't ring up someone and say, hey, what do you think about this idea that I've just had? Oh, I want to do this, you know. And I remember when it came out, the mainstream had a good attack, and many people had a good attack at me for saying that. I was like, I just want to, you know, number one, it was my truth, and it still is. Yeah. And number two, it was an experiment to see how would that ripple through people's consciousness and awareness, and without even needing to know the answer of that. But it was just like, let's put this out there, you know, an act of nearly self-love and defiance against the system in a country that loves to, well, in the past has loved to chop down tall poppies.
Yeah. Imagine if that was just, that's all. Like, imagine if that was just accepted. That when you said that, there was like that. Of course, yeah. Well, of course you do. So let's move. Like, imagine. I mean, isn't it interesting that when you put attention upon yourself, I mean, it's really, I think it's phenomenal how much energy we put into denying ourselves at times. But just to say that I'm the one that inspires me, I'm just imagine that was just common vernacular, that's what, you know, kids were speaking about, that they weren't looking to marvel, they weren't looking to, you know, these ridiculous expectations on sporting people to be a role model, you know, like with the to get the vanilla out of life and start to bring back character and difference. I mean, that's a great starting point, which I'd say all of this stuff that's going on in the world is doing. It's causing people to break out and ask questions, and whether they like or don't like what other people are saying, they're actually starting to speak. It's just you know, it's become so abstract to us to actually have someone say what they mean, because previously there's been the pantomime of hanging out with people that are like us, speaking the same way, dressing the same way, and having the same conversations. You know, it's there's a real beauty and difference in what's happening at the moment that allows all those questions to come up. You know, like it's like what you're saying, to say that I inspire me, there couldn't be anything more true, especially when we embody that. Yeah?
And it's interesting, the connections that are happening at the moment for me, just going surfing. It's shifted so much over the last couple of years. You know, the conversations out of the lineup or on the headland or in the car park is just, it's really interesting. I'll never forget the one a few days ago. This guy just, and they're all strangers to me, pretty much, that come and introduce themselves. And this fellow said, yeah, he goes, where do you think this is all going? Yeah. you could say he was on our page, and I don't like to say that, but I was like, I got fucking no idea, mate. I said, and that's the truth. I got no fucking idea. I said, but I'd be prepared if I was you for any outcome. And that's not about fear. It's bringing us back as we had this conversation before we started recording about Jason and the nature that he witnessed yesterday, start of spring around his house, and the death and the hunting that happened around on your farm there. And one thing that I've learned to realize from being in nature, especially over the last 7-8 years, is everything's trying to eat something else. You know, whether it wants to eat it alive, and you know that's pretty heavy stuff. But the one thing that birds, snakes, all animals know is survival and being prepared. I've been watching this willy wagtail build its a nest over the last month, pretty much, or a few weeks, and they did it last year this time, and it's already sitting in its nest. Whether it's laid the eggs or about to lay the eggs, I'm not sure. I'm not that dialed in yet.
Yeah.
But they're always getting prepared. They're always prepared. They're always living in the moment, but they're also preparing. Like watching that nest being built, they're preparing for everything. And I believe this is an invitation. Like I said to that guy, it's like, be prepared. This is an invitation for us to come back to the fundamental nature of life. Food, water, shelter. Can you survive by yourself? If it comes to that, or can we rely on a community to look at, to help each other? Maybe, maybe not. I had a chat with a fellow the other day that's a very unique individual, like we all are. You could say he's the epitome of an alpha male, so to speak. And he said to me, he must be in his 40s and he's got kids. He said, I've been training for this moment all my life. I've seen what's coming, and I am prepared to do whatever it takes to survive. And he wasn't joking when he said that. He goes, I will do whatever it takes to survive this without anybody taking any control over my actions. I'm like, okay. Shit's getting real, but it's always been real. It's just we've been disconnected from it for so long, and we've been so comfy to a degree.
Sure. I think that's I just want to say that guy, what you're saying there, it's so easy to think that guy's crazy. Like, you know, unhinged to say or think that I'm going to do anything, be prepared to do anything for my own, you know, life and survival. But I think for all of us, that we sometimes forget that to actually get to that particular point, that takes a hell of a lot of courage. You know, like to actually, I realize that in doing that I've considered the shit that could go down. And if I'm prepared for that, I'm not going to be reactive to it. I can then start to reconcile that from a place of peace, you know, because it's like a little bit the same before, that you learn to fight so that you don't have to. So you're not fearful of what happens. But it's to get to that particular point, even like you're saying, you know, in the same courage that and it may just be natural to you, but, you know, I'm the one that inspires me to be able to speak of our own brilliance and intentions at times, is to realize to get to even a point of loving ourselves, we have to let go of so much stuff. We have to let go of so much judgment of what other people might think to actually say certain things out loud and express ourselves with freedom. So when I hear someone's prepared to do anything for their own survival, I don't look at them as, well, you know, that there's certain situations where it becomes quite obvious that there's a level of being unhinged. But these types of conversations are becoming more present because people are becoming more aware of the entirety of what they're living in. And I mean, I've always known horticulture and love growing things of all sorts. But I haven't been. And it's been amazing in the last number of months putting a garden in place. And actually, I'm not someone who likes exercise and going to a gym and all that. I like to go on an adventure or a walk or, whatever it is to find some activity. But I've been loving, for a couple of hours a day, getting into the garden and just sweating. And we got given a boat recently, which was a whole other story, but to sand that down, it's getting back to, preparing and doing things of purpose with my body rather than going and standing in a gym for, that's never sat with me. But it's the same part in preparing for life and being independent. It doesn't mean we can't share and do everything else, but to be able to recognize and appreciate what it requires to actually support myself, it starts to allow us to really value what we are.
We actually got a meeting today with a gardening expert to help us set up our new garden that we're setting up, and Nick and I were like, yeah, we're going to start thinking about having enough food not only for ourselves but for our community. Like that's our focus at the moment. That's where our attention is self-sufficiency, but also providing for others. And it feels really good to have that direction at the moment and have our attention on that. And again, it's I know some about gardening, but I want to learn more about it. It's and raising cattle and the whole thing. And I'm excited about this next adventure, ongoing adventure into another realm. And I'll see where my weaknesses are, because the weakness is just not, I haven't learned that yet,
something just came to mind to share, and it's it might be something you really love. There's and I've never read it, but I was told the concept of it, but that in growing plants and in the microorganisms, and I can find the book if needed from his friend, but that when he was talking about going and standing in the soil of where you're growing your food, but also urinating into the soil and everything there, that the food that is created and that comes picks up upon what it is that you require and need, in the same way that, what you can do with a cactus as well, that if you're having that for medicine. But the very nature of that in the way in which it goes so much deeper into old integrated forms of farming and production of food in a symbiosis with what we are. So like what your t-shirt's saying there, food is medicine, but food created on a mass scale, with different intentions, but to grow our own food, to stand in the same grounds, for that to feel what we are, to then provide us with everything we need, is it was just a beautiful concept that is obvious when you stop to consider it, but how knowledge has told us that, put a spray on it, chuck this on it, and it'll all work, or just go and get it out of a plastic box.
I hear you, brother. Jace, until we meet again, I love you, mate, and thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Pete. Love you too, and love sharing the space with you.
Cheers, brother. Beautiful.
Easy. I didn't know if we were still recording that, and then